What if I told you that the person sitting next to you at work right now might not be who you think they are? What if, behind their friendly smile and morning coffee routine, something far more sinister is hiding? Tonight, I'm sharing 6 disturbing stories from co-staffs. Stories that will make you question everyone you work with. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are real experiences from real people who discovered that their colleagues were harboring dark, terrifying secrets. Before we begin, make sure you're somewhere safe. Lock your doors, turn on the lights, because after hearing these stories, you'll never look at your workplace the same way again. In March 2019, Sarah Mitchell started working the night shift at a small medical records facility in Stafford. The building was old, converted from a Victorian mansion, and during the midnight hours, it felt like a tomb. Sarah worked alone most nights, digitizing patient files in a basement office that smelled of mildew and old paper. But she wasn't completely alone. There was Marcus. Marcus had worked there for 15 years. He was in his late 40s, quiet, and always arrived exactly at 11 p.m. when Sarah's shift began. He worked 2 floors up in the archives, organizing physical files. Their paths rarely crossed, but when they did, Marcus was always polite, always smiling, always asking how she was settling in. Sarah thought nothing of it at first. Marcus seemed harmless enough, but then she started noticing things. Every morning when her shift ended, Sarah would pass by the archives on her way out. The door was always cracked open, and she could hear Marcus moving around inside. But one morning, as she walked past, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Whispering. Not just talking to himself, but whispering in different voices, like he was having conversations with multiple people. Sarah stopped and listened. The voices were distinct. A woman's voice, pleading. A child's voice, crying. An elderly man's voice, groaning in pain. Sarah convinced herself she was imagining things. Night shifts could mess with your mind. But the whispering continued every morning. Different voices, different conversations. Always when Marcus thought no one was listening. Then Sarah discovered what Marcus was really doing in that archive room. One night, her computer crashed, and she needed to retrieve a backup file from upstairs. It was 3 a.m. The building was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Sarah climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As she approached the archives, she heard the whispering again. But this time, she could make out words. "Don't worry, Margaret. You're safe with me now. Nobody will hurt you anymore." Sarah's heart started pounding. Margaret was the name of a patient whose files she'd digitized just days earlier. Margaret Williams, deceased 1987. She crept closer to the door and peered through the crack. What she saw inside that room will haunt her forever. Marcus was sitting at a small desk, surrounded by hundreds of patient files. But these weren't the files he was supposed to be organizing. These were files of deceased patients. And scattered across the desk were personal items, jewelry, photographs, even locks of hair. Marcus was holding an old wedding ring, turning it over in his fingers as he whispered to it. "I know you missed your husband, Eleanor, but you don't have to be lonely anymore. I'm here with you." Sarah realized with growing horror that Marcus had been stealing personal items from the files of dead patients, items that families had never reclaimed, and he was talking to them like they were alive, like they were his friends. But it got worse. As Sarah watched, Marcus opened a small wooden box on his desk. Inside were dozens of hospital ID bracelets, patient bracelets from people who had died. Marcus picked up one of the bracelets and fastened it around his own wrist. "There we go, little Timothy. Now we can be together." Sarah counted at least 20 bracelets already on Marcus's arms. 20 dead patients that he was pretending to carry with him. She backed away from the door, her hands shaking. But as she turned to leave, the floorboard creaked under her feet. The whispering stopped. Sarah ran. She ran down those stairs as fast as she could, grabbed her things, and left the building. She never went back to that job, but she did report what she'd seen to the police. When officers searched the archive room, they found Marcus's collection. Over 300 personal items stolen from deceased patients' files. Jewelry, photographs, dentures, even prosthetic limbs. Marcus had been taking these items home and arranging them in his basement like a shrine. But the most disturbing discovery was a journal Marcus kept. Pages and pages of conversations he claimed to have with the dead patients. He believed that by taking their belongings, he was keeping their spirits alive. He thought he was helping them. Marcus was arrested and committed to a psychiatric facility. The families of the deceased patients were notified, and many came to reclaim their loved ones' belongings. But some items were never claimed. And according to staff at the facility where Marcus is being held, he still whispers to invisible people in his room. Sarah never worked a night shift again. But sometimes, late at night when she's alone, she swears she can still hear the whispering. Different voices, different conversations. Like the dead are trying to tell her something she doesn't want to hear. In 2016, Rebecca Chen got her first job out of college at a small accounting firm in Stoke-on-Trent. The office was cramped, with 6 employees sharing a single floor of an old brick building. Rebecca was excited to start her career, and her colleagues seemed friendly enough, especially David Harper. David was the senior accountant, about 35 years old, and he took Rebecca under his wing from day one. He showed her the filing system, explained the office procedures, and always offered to help when she was struggling with a difficult client account. But David had a habit that Rebecca found odd. He was always taking pictures. Not obvious pictures with his phone. These were sneaky photos. Rebecca would catch him out of the corner of her eye, pointing his phone toward her desk, toward other employees, toward clients who came into the office. When she asked him about it, David would laugh it off. Just documenting the workday, he'd say, for the company newsletter. The company didn't have a newsletter. Rebecca started paying closer attention to David's photography habit. She noticed he had multiple phones, at least 3 that she could see. And he was constantly switching between them, taking pictures from different angles. Sometimes he would excuse himself to the bathroom and come back having changed phones entirely. One day, Rebecca was working late when she heard David's voice coming from the conference room. She thought he was on a client call, but as she listened, she realized he was talking about her. Rebecca's looking particularly stressed today. Notice how she keeps touching her hair when she's nervous. That's a new behavior. Started about 2 weeks ago. Rebecca crept closer to the conference room door. David was alone, but he was speaking into his phone like he was recording a voice memo. She wore the blue sweater again today, 3rd time this month. I think it's her comfort sweater. She wears it when she's anxious about deadlines. Rebecca's blood went cold. David was documenting her behavior, analyzing her patterns, recording her habits like she was some kind of test subject. She stayed hidden and listened as David continued his recording. I've been watching Rebecca for 3 months now. I have over 400 photos documenting her daily routines, emotional states, and social interactions. Tomorrow, I'll introduce a stress factor by accidentally double booking her appointment schedule. I want to see how she responds to unexpected pressure. Rebecca realized with growing horror that David wasn't just taking random pictures. He was conducting some kind of psychological experiment on her, on all of them. The next day, Rebecca arrived early and searched David's desk while he was at lunch. In the bottom drawer, she found a thick folder labeled Subject Documentation, RC. Inside were hundreds of photographs of her. Photos taken from across the office, photos taken through windows, photos taken in the parking lot, even photos that appeared to be taken from outside her apartment building. But the photos weren't the worst part. David had written detailed notes on the back of each picture. Day 47. Subject exhibits signs of romantic interest in colleague JM. Note: increased grooming behavior and prolonged eye contact. Day 62. Subject relationship status changed. Observed crying in supply closet. Relationship with JM terminated. Subject vulnerable to manipulation. Day 78. Subject responded well to praise regarding quarterly reports. File under positive reinforcement strategies. Rebecca flipped through dozens of photos, each with increasingly detailed psychological analysis written on the back. David had been studying her like a lab rat, documenting her every emotion, her every reaction, her every personal detail. Then she found the other folders. Subject documentation, MK. Subject documentation, TS. Subject documentation, JL. David had files on every employee in the office. Years worth of photographs and psychological analysis. He had been documenting their lives, their relationships, their weaknesses, their fears. Rebecca found a master notebook where David had written his conclusions. Human behavior in confined office environment follows predictable patterns. Subjects unaware of observation demonstrate authentic emotional responses. Recommend continuing documentation to develop comprehensive behavioral modification protocols. David wasn't just a creepy photographer. He was conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on his coworkers. He believed he was some kind of researcher, studying human behavior without consent. Rebecca took photos of the evidence with her phone and went straight to HR. But when they confronted David, his response was chilling. "I'm helping you understand your employees better," he said calmly. "This research could revolutionize workplace efficiency. You should be thanking me." David truly believed he was doing nothing wrong. In his mind, he was conducting legitimate research. The fact that he was violating everyone's privacy, stalking them, manipulating their environment to observe their reactions, none of that seemed to register as inappropriate. The police found over 10 zero photographs in David's apartment, along with detailed psychological profiles of dozens of people. Not just coworkers, but neighbors, grocery store clerks, anyone David encountered regularly. He had been documenting and analyzing human behavior for years. David was arrested and charged with stalking and harassment. But the psychological evaluation revealed something even more disturbing. David suffered from a rare condition where he couldn't distinguish between appropriate social observation and invasive surveillance. To him, watching people was just how you learned about the world. Rebecca quit that job and moved to a different city, but the experience left her permanently paranoid. She covers all the cameras on her devices. She checks for hidden cameras wherever she goes. Because she learned that sometimes the person studying you most closely is the one you'd never suspect. And sometimes they think they're doing it for science. Let me tell you about Jennifer Walsh and her experience at a customer service call center in 2018. It's a story that proves sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most helpful. Jennifer had just started working at Tech Support Solutions, a call center that handled customer complaints for various companies. The work was stressful, angry customers, demanding quotas, constant monitoring. But there was one coworker who made everything easier. His name was Kevin Marsh, and he was impossibly helpful. Kevin had worked at the call center for 5 years. He knew every system, every shortcut, every trick to handle difficult customers. And for some reason, he took a special interest in helping Jennifer succeed. When Jennifer struggled with the computer system, Kevin would appear at her desk with step-by-step instructions he'd written out by hand. When she had a particularly nasty customer, Kevin would somehow show up and offer to transfer the call to his line. When she missed her quota for the day, Kevin would stay late to help her catch up. At first, Jennifer was grateful. Kevin seemed like the perfect colleague, experienced, generous with his time, and genuinely invested in her success. But after a few weeks, Jennifer started noticing that Kevin's help came with a price. Kevin always wanted to know exactly what customers said to her. He asked detailed questions about their complaints, their personal information, their account details. When Jennifer mentioned she couldn't share customer information due to privacy policies, Kevin would laugh. "Come on, Jen. We're all on the same team here. I'm just trying to help you handle these cases better." Then Kevin started asking about Jennifer's personal life. Where did she live? Did she live alone? What time did she get home from work? He framed these questions as concern for her safety. "This neighborhood can be dangerous for a young woman working late shifts. I just want to make sure you're being careful." But the questions felt invasive, and Kevin's helpfulness started feeling less helpful and more controlling. One evening, Jennifer was working late on a particularly difficult case when her computer crashed. She lost hours of work and was close to tears when Kevin appeared at her desk. "Don't worry," he said. "I can recover that data for you. Just give me your login credentials." Jennifer hesitated. Sharing login credentials was strictly against company policy, but Kevin had helped her so many times before, and she desperately needed that data recovered. "I don't know, Kevin. We're not supposed to share passwords." Kevin's expression changed. For just a moment, Jennifer saw something cold flash across his face. But then he smiled again. "Of course you're right. Company policy. Tell you what, just log in and I'll walk you through the recovery process." Jennifer logged into her computer and Kevin leaned over her shoulder, guiding her through what seemed like a complex data recovery procedure. She was so focused on following his instructions that she didn't notice Kevin was memorizing every keystroke. The next morning, Jennifer discovered that someone had accessed her computer overnight. Customer records had been viewed. Personal information had been copied. Her supervisor pulled her into a meeting to ask why she was accessing customer accounts at 2 a.m. when she wasn't even in the office. Jennifer knew immediately who was responsible. But when she confronted Kevin, he seemed genuinely confused. "Why would I need your login? I have my own access to everything." Kevin was right. As a senior employee, he had higher level access than Jennifer. So why would he need her credentials? Jennifer started paying closer attention to Kevin's behavior. She noticed he had notebooks full of information about their coworkers, birthdays, addresses, family details, personal problems. He called it his team-building resource, but it looked more like surveillance notes. She noticed Kevin often volunteered to help with IT issues, which gave him access to other people's computers and passwords. She noticed he frequently offered to cover shifts for colleagues, which meant he could access their workstations when they weren't around. And she noticed Kevin had detailed knowledge about customers that went far beyond what he should have known from the official records. One day, Jennifer overheard Kevin on a personal phone call during his break. "Yeah, I've got everything you need. Full credit reports, social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers. These people call in to complain and hand over their entire lives. It's like they're begging to be robbed." Jennifer realized with growing horror that Kevin wasn't just being helpful. He was using his position at the call center to steal customer information. And he was using his coworkers' trust to gain access to even more data. Kevin had created the perfect identity theft operation. He positioned himself as the helpful colleague everyone could rely on. When people had computer problems, they called Kevin. When they needed to share passwords for legitimate work reasons, they trusted Kevin. When they needed someone to cover their shift and access their customer accounts, Kevin volunteered. All the while, Kevin was collecting personal information from customers and coworkers alike. Social security numbers, credit card information, addresses, security question answers. Everything you'd need to steal someone's identity. Jennifer reported Kevin to the police, and when they investigated, they discovered he had been running this operation for years. Kevin had stolen the identities of over 200 customers and used his coworkers' login credentials to cover his tracks. But the most chilling part was Kevin's reaction when he was arrested. He genuinely seemed to believe he had done nothing wrong. "I helped everyone," he told the officers. "I made their jobs easier. I solved their problems. If I happen to benefit from that information, what's the harm?" These customers were going to lose their money to someone eventually. At least I was polite about it. Kevin couldn't understand why stealing people's identities was wrong if he was also being helpful in other ways. In his mind, the helpful acts somehow justified the theft. Jennifer learned that Kevin had been targeting coworkers for years, always choosing new employees who would be grateful for his help and less likely to question his methods. His helpfulness wasn't kindness, it was predatory behavior designed to gain trust and access. The call center had to notify hundreds of customers about the data breach. Several coworkers discovered their personal information had been compromised. Kevin was sentenced to 8 years in prison for identity theft and fraud. But Jennifer's experience taught her a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who seem the most helpful. Because when someone is eager to solve all your problems, you have to ask yourself, what problem are they really trying to solve? And sometimes, that problem is how to get close enough to destroy your life. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, most companies were struggling to maintain team morale while working remotely. But at Digital Marketing Solutions, they had Lisa Crawford, the ultimate team builder. Lisa was the office manager, and she was obsessed with creating a positive work environment. Even during lockdown, she organized virtual game nights, online birthday parties, and group video calls just to check in on everyone's mental health. When the office reopened, Lisa's team-building activities went into overdrive. She organized group lunches, after-work social events, team-building retreats, and monthly office parties. She knew everyone's birthdays, anniversaries, and personal struggles. She remembered your kids' names, your pet's health problems, and your relationship status. Lisa seemed like the perfect colleague, caring, attentive, and genuinely invested in everyone's well-being. But Michael Torres, a graphic designer at the company, started noticing that Lisa's team building came with strings attached. It started small. Lisa would organize group lunches, but she'd arrange the seating chart to put certain people together. She'd plan office parties, but she'd carefully control who got invited to which events. She'd schedule team-building activities, but she'd divide people into specific groups based on what she called personality compatibility. Michael realized Lisa wasn't just organizing events, she was orchestrating relationships. During a company retreat, Michael overheard Lisa talking to another coworker about their colleague Sarah. "Sarah's been resistant to team integration," Lisa said. "She keeps eating lunch alone and declining group activities. We need to work on her social compliance." Social compliance, the phrase stuck with Michael. Lisa wasn't just encouraging teamwork, she was demanding conformity. Michael started paying attention to how Lisa interacted with different employees. People who participated in her activities got better project assignments, more flexible schedules, and Lisa's public praise during meetings. People who declined her invitations found themselves excluded from important communications, assigned to less desirable projects, and subjected to Lisa's passive-aggressive comments about team players. Lisa had created a social hierarchy where participation in her activities determined your workplace status. But it went deeper than favoritism. Michael discovered that Lisa was collecting detailed personal information about everyone during her team-building events. She would organize trust-building exercises where people shared personal stories. She would plan team bonding activities that required people to reveal their fears, insecurities, and family problems. She would schedule wellness check-ins where she encouraged people to discuss their mental health struggles. Lisa called it creating a supportive work family. But Michael realized she was building a database of everyone's vulnerabilities. Then Michael discovered what Lisa was doing with that information. During a team-building retreat, Michael forgot his charger and went back to his room to get it. As he walked down the hallway, he heard Lisa's voice coming from her room. She was on a phone call, and she was talking about their coworker, Jake. Jake has been struggling with anxiety since his divorce. He's financially stressed and emotionally vulnerable. This would be the perfect time to approach him about the opportunity. Michael stopped outside Lisa's door and listened. I've been building rapport with him for months through our team activities. He trusts me completely. He sees me as his workplace support system. He won't question anything I recommend. Lisa was talking to someone about recruiting Jake for something, but recruiting him for what? Michael listened as Lisa continued her conversation. The multi-level marketing approach works perfectly in a corporate environment. People already see me as a leader and trust my judgment. When I recommend products or investment opportunities, they don't see it as sales pressure. They see it as friendly advice from someone who cares about their well-being. Michael's blood ran cold. Lisa was using her position as team builder to recruit coworkers into pyramid schemes and questionable investment opportunities. She was leveraging the trust and vulnerability people shared during team-building activities to manipulate them into financial decisions. I've got at least 8 people ready to invest in the cryptocurrency platform. They've all shared their financial struggles with me during our bonding sessions, so I know exactly how to pitch it as a solution to their problems. Lisa wasn't building a supportive work family. She was building a network of people she could exploit financially. Michael started investigating Lisa's activities more carefully. He discovered she had been using team-building events as recruitment opportunities for multiple schemes: cryptocurrency investments, multi-level marketing companies, life coaching programs, even a bizarre wellness retreat that cost $30 per person. Lisa would identify vulnerable employees through her trust-building exercises, then gradually introduce them to opportunities that would solve their problems. Because people had shared their personal struggles with her during team activities, she knew exactly what promises would appeal to them. An employee struggling with debt would be approached about a guaranteed investment opportunity. Someone dealing with health issues would be recruited for a life-changing wellness program. A person going through a divorce would be invited to an empowerment retreat that would help them rebuild their life. Lisa had turned team building into a recruitment pipeline for financial scams. When Michael reported Lisa to HR, they discovered she had convinced over a dozen employees to invest their savings in various schemes. Some had lost thousands of dollars. Others had become involved in selling products to their own friends and family members. But Lisa's response, when confronted, was chilling. I was helping them, she insisted. These people shared their problems with me because they wanted solutions. I provided solutions. The fact that I also benefited financially doesn't change the fact that I was helping them improve their lives. Lisa genuinely believed that exploiting her coworkers' vulnerabilities was a form of care. She thought that using their personal struggles to sell them products and investments was actually helping them solve their problems. The psychological evaluation revealed that Lisa suffered from a narcissistic personality disorder that manifested as manipulative caregiving. She needed to be seen as helpful and essential, but she also needed to profit from her relationships. In her mind, helping people and exploiting them weren't contradictory. They were the same thing. Lisa was fired, and several employees pressed charges for fraud. But the damage was already done. The trust that had been built through months of team-building activities was destroyed. Coworkers who had shared their deepest struggles with Lisa felt violated and manipulated. Michael learned that sometimes the person working hardest to bring the team together is actually working hardest to tear individual lives apart. Because when someone needs to be everyone's friend, you have to ask yourself, what are they selling? And sometimes, what they're selling is your own vulnerability, packaged as care and sold back to you as a solution to problems they helped you create. In 2017, Amanda Reed started working as a project coordinator at a small architectural firm in Burton-upon-Trent. The office was quiet, professional, and run with military precision by the senior project manager, Catherine Wells. Catherine had worked at the firm for 12 years and had a reputation for excellence. Her projects were always completed on time, under budget, and without errors. She was the kind of employee every company dreams of having: organized, reliable, and absolutely dedicated to perfection. But Amanda soon discovered that Catherine's perfectionism came with a dark side. It started with small corrections. Amanda would submit a report, and Catherine would return it covered in red ink. Not just spelling and grammar corrections, but rewrites of entire paragraphs, changes to formatting, and adjustments to her writing style. "This isn't quite up to our standards," Catherine would say kindly. "Let me help you improve it." Amanda appreciated the feedback at first. Catherine clearly knew what she was doing, and Amanda wanted to learn, but the corrections never stopped. No matter how carefully Amanda proofread her work, Catherine would find something to fix. No matter how closely Amanda followed Catherine's previous suggestions, there would always be new issues to address. Then Amanda noticed Catherine was making corrections to other people's work too. Not just suggesting changes, but actually rewriting documents, redesigning presentations, and redoing calculations without telling anyone. When Amanda asked a colleague about it, he shrugged. "That's just Catherine. She has high standards. It's easier to let her fix things than to argue about it." But Amanda started noticing that Catherine's fixes weren't always improvements. Sometimes Catherine would change numbers in reports, alter deadlines in project timelines, or modify client requirements in ways that seemed unnecessary. One day, Amanda caught Catherine at her computer late in the evening working on a project that had been assigned to Amanda. "Oh, I'm just making a few tweaks," Catherine explained. "I noticed some areas that could be improved." Amanda looked at her screen. Catherine wasn't making tweaks. She was completely redoing Amanda's work. Changing the design specifications, altering the budget calculations, even rewriting Amanda's client communications. "Catherine, this project was assigned to me. I need to learn how to handle it myself." Catherine's expression hardened. "Amanda, you're still learning. I'm just ensuring we maintain our quality standards. The client expects perfection, and I won't let substandard work leave this office." But the next morning, Amanda discovered something disturbing. Catherine had submitted the modified project under Amanda's name, but she had also sent a separate email to their supervisor highlighting all the errors in Amanda's original work. Catherine was sabotaging Amanda's work, then fixing it to make herself look indispensable. Amanda started investigating Catherine's other quality improvements. She discovered that Catherine had been secretly modifying everyone's work for years. She would find minor errors or areas for improvement, but instead of discussing them with the original author, she would fix them herself and then document the problems she had found. Catherine kept detailed records of every correction she made, every error she caught, every improvement she implemented. She presented these records to management as evidence of her value to the company and proof that her coworkers needed constant supervision. But Amanda realized Catherine wasn't just finding errors, she was creating them. Late one evening, Amanda was working on an important client presentation when her computer crashed. She lost several hours of work and was panicking about the morning deadline. Catherine appeared at her desk like an angel of mercy. "Don't worry, I have a backup of your presentation on my computer. I was reviewing it earlier to make sure everything looked good." Catherine had made an unauthorized copy of Amanda's work, and when Amanda opened the backup file, she discovered it contained errors that weren't in her original document. Catherine had introduced mistakes into Amanda's work, then positioned herself as the savior who could fix them. Amanda realized with growing horror that Catherine had been systematically sabotaging everyone's work for years. She would sneak onto people's computers, introduce small errors or inconsistencies, then discover these problems and fix them. This made Catherine appear indispensable while making everyone else look incompetent. Catherine had access to everyone's files because she was the senior project manager. She knew everyone's passwords because people trusted her with their login information. She had administrative privileges on the company network because she was considered the most reliable employee. Catherine was using her trusted position to create problems that only she could solve. Amanda started documenting Catherine's activities. She discovered that Catherine had been logging into the system late at night and early in the morning, accessing files she had no legitimate reason to view. She was making subtle changes to reports, introducing small errors into calculations, and even altering client communications after they had been sent. But the most disturbing discovery was Catherine's personal folder on the server. Inside were detailed profiles of every employee, documenting their weaknesses, their mistakes, and their areas of vulnerability. Catherine had been studying her coworkers like a predator studies prey, looking for ways to make them dependent on her expertise. When Amanda reported Catherine to HR, the investigation revealed the extent of her manipulation. Catherine had been sabotaging her coworkers' work for over 5 years. She had cost the company clients, delayed projects, and created an environment where everyone felt incompetent and dependent on her supervision. But Catherine's reaction when confronted was the most chilling part of the whole experience. "I was protecting this company," she said calmly. "I was maintaining our quality standards. If I hadn't been catching all these errors, we would have lost clients years ago. I saved this company from the incompetence of mediocre employees." Catherine genuinely believed she was helping the company by sabotaging her coworkers. She thought that by creating problems and then solving them, she was demonstrating her value and protecting the firm's reputation. The psychological evaluation revealed that Catherine suffered from a superiority complex combined with pathological need for control. She couldn't tolerate the idea that other people might be capable of producing good work without her intervention, so she ensured that they couldn't succeed without her help. Catherine was fired, and the company had to review years of projects to determine which work had been altered without authorization. Several clients had to be contacted about discrepancies in their files. The firm's reputation was damaged by the revelation that their most reliable employee had been systematically manipulating their work product. Amanda learned that sometimes the person who seems most dedicated to excellence is actually dedicated to ensuring that they're the only one who can achieve it. Because when someone needs to be indispensable, they'll make sure everyone else is dispensable. And the most dangerous colleague isn't the one who does bad work. It's the one who makes sure everyone else's work looks bad by comparison. Let me tell you about Daniel Park's experience with the perfect mentor. It's a story that shows how the people who seem most invested in your success might actually be invested in your failure. In 2021, Daniel got his first job out of university at a software development company in Stafford. He was nervous about starting his career in tech, but he was lucky enough to be paired with Stephen Mitchell, a senior developer who had volunteered to mentor new employees. Stephen was everything Daniel hoped for in a mentor. He was patient, knowledgeable, and genuinely seemed to care about Daniel's professional development. Stephen took time to explain complex coding concepts, invited Daniel to sit in on client meetings, and even offered to review Daniel's work before he submitted it to their supervisor. "I want to make sure you succeed here," Stephen would say. "The tech industry can be brutal for new developers. I'm going to help you avoid the mistakes I made when I was starting out." Daniel was grateful. Stephen's guidance helped him navigate the challenging first months of his career. When Daniel struggled with a particularly difficult coding problem, Stephen would stay late to help him work through it. When Daniel felt overwhelmed by a client's demands, Stephen would offer advice on time management and communication strategies. Stephen seemed like the ideal colleague, generous with his time, invested in Daniel's success, and willing to share his expertise without expecting anything in return. But after a few months, Daniel started noticing that Stephen's mentorship came with some unexpected side effects. Daniel's direct supervisor, Maria, began making comments about his work that confused him. "Daniel, I'm concerned about your problem-solving abilities. You seem to rely heavily on others to complete your assignments." Daniel was puzzled. He thought he was being smart by asking Stephen for guidance when he encountered difficulties. "I've also noticed that your coding style is quite similar to Stephen's," Maria continued. "I'd like to see more of your original thinking in your work." Daniel realized that by constantly seeking Stephen's input, he had started copying Stephen's approaches rather than developing his own skills. But whenever Daniel tried to work independently, Stephen would appear with suggestions and improvements. "I can see you're struggling with this," Stephen would say. "Let me show you a better way to approach it." Daniel wanted to learn to solve problems on his own, but Stephen's constant help was preventing him from developing independent problem-solving skills. Then Daniel discovered something that made him question Stephen's motives entirely. Daniel was working late one evening when he overheard Stephen on a phone call in the next office. "Yeah, Daniel's coming along nicely. He's completely dependent on my guidance now. He won't make a move without consulting me first." Daniel stopped working and listened more carefully. "The client presentation next week? Oh, Daniel won't be ready for that. He doesn't have the confidence to handle high-pressure situations yet. I'll need to step in and take the lead." Daniel's heart sank. The client presentation was something he had been preparing for weeks. He felt ready to handle it, but Stephen was telling someone that Daniel wasn't capable. "I've been careful to position myself as indispensable to his success. He sees me as his lifeline in this company. Without my guidance, he'd be completely lost." Daniel realized with growing horror that Stephen wasn't trying to help him succeed. Stephen was trying to keep him dependent. Over the next few days, Daniel started paying closer attention to Stephen's mentorship style. He noticed that Stephen never encouraged him to solve problems independently. Instead of teaching Daniel how to find solutions, Stephen would simply provide the solutions himself. Stephen would take over difficult tasks rather than teaching Daniel how to handle them. He would speak for Daniel in meetings rather than encouraging him to voice his own ideas. He would edit Daniel's reports so heavily that they no longer reflected Daniel's original thinking. Stephen was creating learned helplessness. He was training Daniel to believe that he couldn't succeed without constant supervision and guidance. Daniel also discovered that Stephen had been having regular conversations with their supervisor about Daniel's progress. "Daniel is a hard worker, but he lacks confidence," Stephen would report. "He needs constant guidance and support. Without mentorship, I don't think he'd be able to handle his responsibilities independently." Stephen was systematically undermining Daniel's reputation while positioning himself as the solution to Daniel's supposed weaknesses. But the most disturbing discovery came when Daniel accessed some old project files on the company server. He found records of Stephen's previous mentoring relationships over the past 5 years. Stephen had mentored 7 other junior developers, and all 7 had either been fired for poor performance or had left the company after being passed over for promotions. Daniel found performance reviews for Stephen's former mentees. The reviews all contained similar language: lacks independence, requires constant supervision, shows potential but needs significant guidance to complete tasks, not ready for increased responsibilities. Every single person Stephen had mentored had developed the same reputation: promising but dependent, hardworking but lacking confidence, talented but requiring constant oversight. Daniel realized that Stephen had been systematically sabotaging the careers of junior developers for years. He would volunteer to mentor new employees, create dependency relationships with them, then use their learned helplessness to make himself appear indispensable to the company. Stephen's mentorship wasn't designed to help people succeed. It was designed to ensure they couldn't succeed without him. Daniel started investigating Stephen's methods more carefully. He discovered that Stephen had a pattern of behavior with all his mentees. First, Stephen would establish himself as the helpful expert, offering guidance and support to overwhelmed new employees. Second, Stephen would gradually take over more and more of his mentees' responsibilities, always framing it as temporary help or teaching opportunities. Third, Stephen would report his mentees' struggles to management, positioning himself as the patient teacher trying to help an incompetent student. Finally, Stephen would recommend that his mentees be given less challenging assignments or be passed over for promotions because they weren't ready for increased responsibilities. Meanwhile, Stephen's reputation as a dedicated mentor grew stronger with each failed mentee. Management saw him as someone who was willing to work with difficult employees and help struggling workers. They didn't realize he was creating the struggles he claimed to be solving. Daniel decided to test his theory. He stopped asking Stephen for help and started working independently on a new project. Within days, Stephen appeared at his desk with concerns. "Daniel, I noticed you're working on the Morrison project alone. That's a pretty complex assignment for someone at your level. Are you sure you don't need some guidance?" Daniel politely declined Stephen's help. Stephen's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing. The Morrison client doesn't tolerate mistakes. If this project fails, it could reflect poorly on your performance review." Stephen was trying to undermine Daniel's confidence and create fear about independence. Over the next week, Daniel noticed Stephen making subtle comments to their supervisor about the Morrison project. "I offered to help Daniel with the Morrison account, but he preferred to handle it alone. I hope he's not taking on more than he can manage." Stephen was planting seeds of doubt about Daniel's judgment and capabilities. But Daniel pushed through. He completed the Morrison project successfully. Without Stephen's input, the client was pleased with the results, and Daniel's supervisor praised his independent work. Stephen's reaction was telling. Instead of congratulating Daniel, Stephen found reasons to criticize the project. "The code could be more efficient," Stephen said. "The client interface could be more intuitive. Next time, you might want to consider a different approach." Stephen couldn't tolerate the idea that Daniel had succeeded without his guidance. Daniel reported Stephen to HR, and when they investigated, they discovered the pattern of failed mentees. They also found that Stephen had been deliberately giving his mentees outdated or inefficient coding techniques, ensuring that their work would be substandard compared to more experienced developers. Stephen had been teaching his mentees to fail. When confronted, Stephen's response was chilling. "I've dedicated years of my career to helping junior developers," he said. "If they couldn't handle the demands of this industry, that's not my fault. I did everything I could to support them." Stephen genuinely believed he had been helping his mentees, even though he had systematically undermined their careers. He couldn't see that his support was actually sabotage. The psychological evaluation revealed that Stephen suffered from a control disorder combined with pathological altruism. He needed to be seen as helpful and necessary, but he also needed to ensure that the people he helped remained dependent on him. He couldn't tolerate the success of others because it diminished his sense of importance. Stephen was fired, and the company had to review their mentorship program. Several of Stephen's former mentees were contacted and offered opportunities to return to the company with proper support and training. Daniel learned that sometimes the person most eager to help you succeed is actually most invested in ensuring you fail. Because when someone needs to be essential to your success, they'll make sure you can never succeed without them. And the most dangerous mentor isn't the one who doesn't teach you anything. It's the one who teaches you that you can't learn anything on your own. These 6 stories from co-staffs might seem extreme, but they share a common thread. They show us how people we trust can hide the darkest intentions behind the most helpful facades. Marcus collected the belongings of the dead, believing he was keeping their spirits alive. David documented his coworkers like lab rats, convinced he was conducting legitimate research. Kevin used helpfulness to steal identities, thinking his assistants justified his theft. Lisa exploited vulnerability in the name of team building, seeing manipulation as care. Catherine sabotaged others' work to appear indispensable, believing she was protecting quality standards. And Stephen destroyed careers while calling it mentorship, convinced he was helping people understand their limitations. Each of these individuals genuinely believed they were helping, improving, or protecting the people around them. That's what makes them so terrifying. They weren't monsters who knew they were doing evil. They were people who had convinced themselves that their harmful actions were actually beneficial. The next time you're at work, pay attention to the colleague who's always eager to help. Notice the person who knows a little too much about everyone's personal life. Watch the individual who seems indispensable to every project. Question the mentor who never encourages independence. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in your workplace isn't the obvious troublemaker. It's the one everyone thinks they can trust. Look around your office tomorrow. Look at the faces of your coworkers. Remember these stories and ask yourself, do you really know the person sitting next to you? Some colleagues are exactly what they seem to be. Others are wearing masks so convincing that even they've forgotten what's underneath. The question is, can you tell the difference? Sweet dreams. If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video it tells the algorithm you survived, sob som. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave. Or someone who thinks they are. Comment below. We want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.